Thank you very much, Tink, and I just want to say thank you for having us here today. The IWF and Mary Collins Foundation work incredibly closely together. We've been working in partnership for many years now. And just as a reflection on the really moving story that you just played, clearly you and probably many other people watching today's presentation will have direct contact with the children and in the images that we see at the IWF. And we must see many hundreds or thousands of children in the images, and we have no idea whether those children know that their images are circulating on the internet, or whether they have absolutely no idea. But regardless, we do the work we do to get the images removed. So I'm just going to share a presentation with you now. Hopefully you can see my slides. So my name is Emma Hardy. I'm the Communications Director at the Internet Watch Foundation, and I want to give you an overview of the work that we do and a little bit of an insight into how the coronavirus has affected us in ways that we hadn't necessarily imagined, and also to talk about a trend that we are seeing on the increase with regards to something termed self-generated child sexual abuse, which Tink was alluding to a few minutes ago. I'm going to go through this quite fast. We describe our work at IWF often as inch wide, mile deep. So I'm not going to get into the detail of today, but you can find out more about our work if you wanted to in a 6-part podcast, which we released earlier this year called Pixels from a Crime Scene. And you can download it from Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts from. It's had about 18,000 downloads now, and Tink also in the work of Mary Collins Foundation features on the podcast too, and you can find out more information set in an international context about this area of work if you want to. So the IWF is a not-for-profit organisation. We're a charity, and we find and remove images and videos showing child sexual abuse from the internet, and we work predominantly in the clear web, which is the internet that you and I would use all the time. I know in the introduction on the chat it mentioned we're talking about removing images on the dark web. That isn't the focus of this presentation, although we are able in some circumstances to get content removed from the dark web, but only in very specific circumstances. So we also build technology for good. So the technology helps us find and remove and disrupt the supply of child sexual abuse material. We've been around for 24 years now, which seems crazy, and that lots of the companies that support our work weren't even a thought in their founders' minds at the time that the IWF was set up. And we offer people a place to report child sexual abuse content anonymously should they wish to do so. And you can do that through our website if you're in the UK, or we actually have reporting portals now set up in 43 countries around the world, and there's something like another 5 which are being lined up to open over the course of the next couple of months as well. So most people report anonymously to us. We give people that option because people don't want to think about if there's any reprisals from reporting, if there's going to be any police contacting them. There won't be, but it gives people that feeling of safety about reporting the content to us. And also because child sexual abuse material on the internet is criminal material. If you see it, regardless of whether you meant to see it or not, it is an offence to see it. So we need to give people a way to report that imagery to us, to get it removed in a way that people feel like they're safe and able to do so. So for many years, around 80% of the reports we received from the public were anonymous, and I think this year it's actually gone up to 90%. It's like a bit of a jump that we haven't seen for quite some time. And we're also supported by over 150 global internet companies as well. And you'll see from that slide probably lots of logos that you will recognise on there for the companies that support our work. And in the main, our funding comes from internet companies, with a small proportion of it coming from the European Commission, which we are soon not to have any longer. So I want to talk a little bit about how we go about doing our work. Firstly, we have many highly trained analysts. We have something like 13 or 14 now, but we have just recruited for more analysts to do a special piece of work that will be starting from the new year. So we're always, over the past few years, we have expanded our team, and they assess the reports that come into them. So the reports will either come from the public, or they might come from the police or internet companies themselves. And the police and internet companies represent a very small number of the reports that we receive into our hotline. We receive a lot of reports from the public, but since 2014, we've been able to proactively search for child sexual abuse material on the internet. Now, the IWF is staffed by a team of civilian analysts. They're not police officers. They don't have the protection to be able to view criminal material without some kind of consequence. So we have a memorandum of understanding in place between the IWF, the Crown Prosecution Service and the National Police Chiefs Council, which gives our analysts the ability to look for and actively search for child sexual abuse material without fear of being prosecuted, because they're doing it as part of their work and it's understood what IWF is about. So that's really important. And up until 2014, we could work from the intelligence in a public report. So we might receive a report and we can have a look sort of 1 or 2 clicks away from where that public report takes us on the internet, but we couldn't just go off and searching. Since 2014, David Cameron got involved in this area of work, and he wanted to know how he could help make IWF much more effective. And one of the ways is that we can use our really highly skilled analysts to use the intelligence that they gather on a daily basis in order to be able to proactively go out and look for this content. So that's what we started doing. And after the first full year of proactive searching, the figures, the amount of child sexual abuse material that we could find and then get removed just kind of went up. We felt like we were having so much more impact for the same number of analysts that we have. So I'm just going to talk you through the second bullet point there. If this was a different kind of presentation led by the people that lead our hotline, then they could probably spend 2 hours at least talking you through how they go about finding and removing child sexual abuse material. I'm going to sum it up hopefully in about 30 seconds. The report comes in wherever it comes from, whether that's the public or whether we find the page ourselves of imagery. Then an assessment takes place. So we're looking at it, we're asking ourselves the question, is this child sexual abuse material? Does it fail UK law? What's the age of the child? What's the level of severity of the abuse that we can see? And there's category A, B and C, and probably some people are very familiar with those. If not, the categories A, B and C are spelled out on a slide coming up. And so all this information is gathered about what the imagery is showing us, and also lots of information around the page that the imagery is sitting on is gathered as well, such as, is it commercial content? Are there payment mechanisms being offered for more content potentially? All of this helps build a picture and enables us to build our data sets and services for the internet companies that are in membership. The important stage then is to trace where this content is hosted. Now, when we perform a trace, this doesn't tell us where the picture was originally taken, so which country was the child sat in, and it doesn't tell us anything about necessarily the platform that we found the image on. We will ultimately trace where that image is hosted at the end of the day, which country has the server sat in it that is hosting that image. So we'll perform a trace. And then we will work with our partner InHope, the International Association of Internet Hotlines, and there on the previous couple of slides ago, there was like a logo at the top saying InHope. We will work through our partners within the InHope hotline network to work with them to get the content removed where it falls into one of their countries. And we will also chase that content up. So we don't just leave it as, you know, here's the content, this is where it's hosted, off you go, you get it removed. If there's been no activity after a couple of days, we will get in touch with them and say, look, you know, this is where the content is, what's being done to get it removed. And we work with global internet industry partners, hotlines and law enforcement all over the world. So let's just say we traced the content to be hosted in a country where there is no in-hope hotline. Then we set up partnerships and good contacts with the local police in that country. But we also work through Europol and Interpol as well. We also build technology for good. So what we ask ourselves is, can we build something that's going to help us locate more child sexual abuse material, or help internet companies disrupt the supply of child sexual abuse material? Can we find and remove it more quickly? If the answer is yes, then, and we've got the resources, then we will build pieces of technology to help in our mission. And we're a very mission-driven organisation. One such example of a service actually is our keywords list. So we have a list of key terms which are like codes. They could be a jumble of letters and numbers that, to the right individual, that indicates potentially a series of child sexual abuse material images. At the end of last year, we had 453 key terms on that list. We did some work that was funded by Nominet, and through the course of this year, that list now stands at over 5,000 key terms, which is a really valuable resource for internet companies. So if you imagine a search engine, they can take that keywords list, and if someone's typing a term in there to try and reveal child sexual abuse material, that term won't enable the material to be displayed. So that's just one use of a particular service that we offer. I wanted to talk about the global slowdown in the removal of child sexual abuse imagery that we experienced once the lockdown really hit in March. So we, as we all know, in the UK and many countries around the world, we were all placed into some kind of lockdown. 50% of our hotline staff weren't at work at any one time in order to try and safeguard them. So anyone who works at IWF that does not directly work with criminal material, they were able to work from home. And actually, we were already pretty well set up with the technology for people to just go home and start working. So that was good. But because of the footprint of our hotline, people weren't able to sit in a COVID-spaced way. So only 50% of the hotline was in at any one time. And that was replicated across hotlines throughout the InHope network, where there were depleted resources, and some hotlines closed altogether. And also in technology companies, in the abuse teams that we would talk to help get child sexual abuse material removed, they also had depleted resources. Or if they're working from home, then I would like to hope they were really questioning whether they could actually work on the criminal material from home. That is not something that is allowed at IWF at all. So if you imagine we found some child sexual abuse material and we're trying to get it taken down, but actually no one's there at the end of the phone or on the email in whichever country or organisation that we're talking to. So there was generally a global slowdown in the removal of child sexual abuse material, meaning that there was more available for a certain period of time than there would have otherwise have been. And that was one of the impacts of COVID. The other one has been, and I guess it's because there are more people online, more reports coming into our hotline. So we ended up with a situation where only 50% of our hotline staff were working, and yet we had a 50% increase in the public reports being submitted to us, which posed an issue. Actually, what we were able to do after about a month or so in lockdown is we increased the footprint of our hotline so that everyone could be more openly spaced across the entire top floor of our building. So from about some point in June, I think it was, our entire hotline came back and they were working at 100% capacity, and we were able to space people out in a COVID safe way. So for a good while there, there was a lag in reports being taken down, so content taken down globally, but things seem to have leveled out now. What hasn't necessarily leveled out is the increase in reports coming through our door. So at one point it did hit a 50% increase, and I think the last time I looked, I think we were on about a 37.5% increase across the whole year in public reports to IWF. So we've got to really manage that, as well as doing our proactive work, which we continue to do. At the same time in lockdown, we were able to get hold of some data from some of our members about the number of attempts that had been made to access child sexual abuse imagery that's on our URL list. So while efforts are taking place to remove criminal content from wherever it's hosted in the world, we put that web page, the URL, on a list. And that list, I mean, it could be a couple of thousand strong, or it could be 12,000 on that list. And I should say that every web page might contain between one and many hundreds or thousands of images as well. So essentially that entire list could contain or be blocking content to millions of pieces of child sexual abuse content. So we asked some of our UK URL list takers whether they could tell us about the number of hits they were seeing against the URL list. This is the number of attempts someone has made, people are making to access material on that list. And they said over the course of 1 month, there were around 8.8 million attempts to access child sexual abuse material. We didn't have that figure previous to that. It seems like a lot. We were actually quite horrified that there were that many attempts. I should caveat this to say actually that there are bots out there that will roam around the internet, and they will also count as a hit to the list, but not 8.8 million attempts. What I actually want to point out with this is that this is the result of 3 companies worth of data. There are 79 companies worldwide that take that list. So who knows what the true figure could be if not every company keeps this data or is able to share it. But I'm left slightly horrified about the amount of attempts that could be being made on a daily basis, an hourly basis even, to access the child sexual abuse imagery that we find. And the final thing on the COVID issue that I want to mention is that we haven't seen a rising trend of new material that we can confidently say was created during lockdown. You could say, well, how would you know it's created during lockdown? We might not know. That's just the reality of it. But I think at one point there was a concern that there might be a rising tide of new material being created. We haven't been able to prove that is the case. Now, with regards to our trends and data, every year we publish quite an extensive amount of data in our annual report, and I'd really encourage anyone who's interested in this area of work to look at that data, to take it, use it in your own presentations and use it to inform your own work. Last year, we processed 260,000 reports into our hotline, which was an increase on last year. Sorry, was an increase on the 2018 figure already. And of those, 132,700 showed the sexual abuse of children, and that number could be equivalent to one image, or it could be equivalent to many images and videos, and very often one web page will contain more than one image of child sexual abuse on it. Now, something I do want to say is that so far this year, we've already surpassed that figure. We surpassed it last week. So despite our hotline working at 50% capacity for a period of time, we are now past the 132,700 figure, and we've still got about, I think, 6 weeks of the year to go. Coming back to the severity of child sexual abuse, categories A, B, and C, you can see on here an explanation of what the categories are, and the bit I want to draw your attention to is the bar for 2019, that blue section there. That's category C imagery, and you can see the year before, so it's 58% for 2019, the year before was 56%, and before that was 44%. So there's been a noticeable jump there in the proportion of category C material that we're seeing, and that's important, and I'll explain it in a minute. I know some of you may well have already seen this slide that Ethel Quayle used. This is a breakdown of the age and the sex of the victims that we saw in the imagery in 2019. And the takeaways from this really on that 2019 bar, it's the proportion of 11 to 13-year-old children that we see. And then the blue chunk under that is the proportion of the material that's of children aged 7 to 10 years old. And actually that grew from the previous year. Now, on the sex of the victims, overall, it's girls. We see most often imagery of girls being shared online, and in 2019, that represented 92%. I don't have an inkling for what it is for 2020 yet. And in a few weeks' time, as soon as we get back from Christmas in the new year, we'll be taking all of our 2020 data, analysing it, and then putting it out in our annual report, which should come in about April next year. One of the questions we get asked quite a lot is, where is content hosted? Now, hosted again is where it's sat on the server in which country, not where the imagery was taken or where people are accessing the imagery from. This is ultimately where we trace it to. And you can see there that, Europe accounts for 9 in every 10 reports that we assess, with the Netherlands being responsible for the hosting of the content in 7 in every 10 occasions. So this does beg the question sometimes from people, well, what about the United States? And the people who know this area of work will say, well, the National Centre for Missing and Exploited Children have published information about the number of reports they get from Facebook, and that's about 18 million. I mean, that blows the Netherlands figure out the water. Yes, it does. This is showing what we find at the IWF. In the US, there's a mandatory reporting laws, which mean that US companies are mandated, they have to report to the National Centre for Missing and Exploited Children every time they find child sexual abuse content on their networks. And actually, they're pretty good at finding it and reporting it in. So we find what's left over. And actually, the stuff that we're finding at the IWF, we ultimately most often trace back to the Netherlands, because actually those US tech companies are doing quite a good job of finding and catching the material on their platforms already and alerting the appropriate authorities, so that we don't find it. Essentially, what we find is the stuff they haven't already caught. I wanted to talk a little bit about a UK success story here. So back in 1996, when the Internet Watch Foundation was founded, there was 18% of the world's child sexual abuse material hosted in the UK, which is staggering, actually. We would have been a significant dot on that map that I just showed previously. I spoke to one of the founders of IWF back in 2015, I think it was, for our anniversary. I think it was 2015. And I was really horrified by what he said, because at the time the government was saying to internet companies that were around then, you are porn barons, you need to clean up your act. And he described how for him, the IWF was his get out of jail free card, which is just an awful, I think is an awful way to describe it. It makes it sound like he didn't take it seriously, but I guess that's how he felt at the time. And he was the owner of Pipex, for those who remember the internet service provider called Pipex. That isn't how we feel about it now, but one of the successes of IWF has been the reduction in UK hosted child sexual abuse material. So in 2003 and onwards, since then, it's been less than 1% of what we found globally. And of course, through the years, we've just been finding more and more and more every year. So I'm really pleased about the fact that we've been able to keep the proportion in the UK very low. And in 2019, it was 0.1%. So on the one hand, that's a UK success story, but on the other hand, you could say, well, who cares? Because actually, it doesn't matter where it's hosted in the world. The internet is such a thing that regardless of where something's hosted, you can access it anyway. And this is why partnerships are key. We all have to work together on a global platform in order to help stop the proliferation of this content. One of the trends that we are seeing that's causing me quite a lot of alarm, and I feel very passionately about this particular trend and trying to do something to combat it. And it's about this horrible term called self-generated child sexual abuse content. Self-generated because there isn't another adult physically present in the room with the child, but there is sexual imagery being produced with the child present in the room, and I think on many of the occasions that we see, the child perhaps doesn't even realise that it's being recorded. So what I want to, and we also, I should say, see that this material encourages and it grooms the children and coerces them into the production of this content. So on the slide, you'll see there's this global threat assessment diagram that comes from the We Protect report that came out earlier in the year. And if you just Google Global Threat Assessment 2019, this will come up. It's on page 30, and it's very, very good at describing the range of ways in which self-generated child sexual abuse material is produced. And the IWF's work, I would say, generally focuses in on 4 and 5 on that diagram, where there is grooming, coercion and sextortion at play, although it's very hard for us to be able to definitely say what's behind the creation of this material. What we see is a child in their bedroom at home, and I am standing in a bedroom now. They are talking to somebody on the other side of the webcam, just in the way that I'm talking to you. And we can see, or we see the child reading things on the screen and then replying on the keyboard. And gradually through this recording that we see in our hotline, the child is being encouraged into more and more sexual behaviour, to the point that very often in bedrooms and bathrooms, we will see them sort of moving the camera about, positioning things effectively so that someone can see adequately the sexual behaviour that's ongoing. Now, somebody on the other side of that webcam is creating that recording, and then it's being shared online, and that's the bit that we see. So we can't see it sort of being produced live. We come along afterwards, after the crime has been committed, and we find it, and then we work to get that content removed. And that is becoming a larger part of the work that we are doing now. And what you might end up with, say, is an hour-long recording where it might just start off with a girl on her bed brushing her hair right up until the sexual activity which is taking place, and it will be cut into, say, smaller videos or individual images, so that one piece of content is cut into many pieces of content, and then it goes out there. Last year, self-generated child sexual abuse imagery represented about a third, 29%, of everything that we dealt with in our hotline, and the majority of it featured girls, and the vast majority were girls, or they were children aged 11 to 13 years old. So that's the key age group. And thinking back to that bar graph, where you can see for the past couple of years, the proportion of 11 to 13-year-olds has grown. Equally, the proportion of self-generated child sexual abuse material has grown. The second most prevalent age group for self-generated material is children aged 7 to 10 years old. You can also see on the other donut there, the category C, more than half of it features category C content, which also, I guess, sort of bolsters that chart that shows that the category C material has grown over time as well. I just want to talk to you about Becky. I'm nearly at my final slide now. Becky is a real little girl. Her name isn't Becky. Actually, we don't know her name, but we, because we're in a unique position where we're able to see child sexual abuse material on the internet as part of our work to get it removed, we're also able to carry out little studies just to put some numbers and an idea behind what we're seeing and what children are experiencing if they're being groomed and coerced into producing child sexual abuse material. So we estimate Becky to be about 10 or 11 years old, and when we see her, she's in her bedroom and she's got cuddly toys on her bed, and she is interacting over a live stream like I am now. Sometimes we see scenes in a bathroom, but most often see scenes in a bedroom, and the child is on their own. And someone might ask, well, how do you know the child's on their own? But if I was to pick up my laptop and sort of move it about like this, you'll get a 360-degree view, and you'll be able to see that there's nobody else in the room, and that's what we see. When we were logging Becky, because we see her every day in our hotline, a third of all the recordings show that she has been encouraged to insert everyday items into her vagina. So this is the creation of category A child sexual abuse material, and she's in the room on her own and she's being encouraged to do this, and someone is recording that on the other side. So twice a day we see Becky, and there are other children like her out there. So one of the things that I'm very, very passionate about doing is to bring forward a national campaign, because this should be entirely preventable. The children are in their homes, but people are accessing them via their internet connected devices where they have a camera. So I really want to see bring forward this national campaign, and we're currently fundraising for that at the moment, although I have been saying that for over a year now, but I really hope that we're nearly there with it. I have ran through everything very quickly. I appreciate that I have done that, so I'm more than happy to take questions at the end, or if you want to hear more about our work and a few international voices as well, then Pixels from a Crime Scene is probably a good idea. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Emma. Really interesting, informative talk as always. I just thought if you could mention a little bit more about the campaign, because I think we would, very keen to be part of that with you and to support you. And I think we're just waiting to hear, is that right, whether you have the funding?
Yeah, so it was in July last year that we looked at our figures with regards to self-generated content, and we were going, oh my God, it now represents 1/3 of everything we deal with. Surely this is preventable, but we're not. We need to reach in the main girls and parents and carers to help them understand that this can be what's happening. And when you think your child is safe in their bedrooms, are they safe in their bedrooms? So we've been bringing forward a campaign. We're working with an agency that put a lot of time, their own time, into doing some research, and we had a huge amount of funding from Microsoft to kickstart this. So we've done a big piece of research. We have campaign ideas created. They haven't gone into production yet. We're just waiting for that last little bit of funding to come in so we can push it into production. I mean, I don't want to put a timescale on it. I'm scared of doing that now because I've been working on this for well over a year to try and bring the funding forward. But it will be a campaign aimed at, in the main, teenage girls, and then a separate strand that's talking to parents and carers as well. And we will be asking all of our stakeholders to help support the campaign, to amplify it. And also there will be a central hub of a microsite where more resources and help will be signposted. So particularly if you're interested in being involved in any way, I'd really encourage you to get in touch with me.